Can you hear me okay, Christina?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
What just Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Sorry, my screen just went blank, so I panicked. The link
Are
is
we
in,
live yet?
yes, I just
Okay.
gonna say the link is in board docs now. Um, as we wait for more board members and staff.
I don't have the ability, Christina, to share my screen as I sometimes do. So if you could just pull up the policies as we discuss them, that'd be great. Thank you.
Get that ready.
Good evening, all.
Good
Hello.
evening.
Yep. Um, Christina, are we live yet?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Okay.
I will say no more.
Okay. All right. So thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Ruth Fortune. I am the chair of the policy committee on this wonderful Cinco de Mayo. Hopefully you'll have festive plans for a delicious dinner tonight. I don't, but I'm hoping you all do. Without any further delay, I'll jump right into our agenda. For second readings, we have quite a few items. I'll start with the graduation policy.
Yep, and we have a Superintendent Daisy Torres-Ho to just briefly, we've already gone through it, but if you wanted to quick review. I think she's on there. Yes, okay.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes. Mhm.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. We're gathered back again today to talk a little bit through our capstone requirements. As we talked about in first reading, we are looking to begin with the class of 2027 students completing a capstone activity as part of one of their other high school courses, not making it a requirement or a standalone class. That was part of our discussion, as well as making a correction to a change that we added when we put in the Economics 1 course to meet our financial literacy requirement. And so if you recall at that time, we were adding that requirement by increasing our social studies credits to 3.5 from 3.0 and reducing our humanities credits from 1.0 to 0.5. We originally did this because we did not want to add the 0.5 financial literacy requirement to other such social studies courses, and we did not capture reflect that this civics course is already a 0.5 credit requirement. Therefore, we were recommending to return to 3.0 social studies and a 1.0 humanities elective. This will now, the requirements will now read as 1.0 US history, 0.5 civics, and our 0.5 economics 1/financial literacy, as well as the social studies elective. So that is kind of where we were from our last gathering, a quick overview. And I think we'll open up to questions.
I may have limited ability to see if your hands are up. So Christina, if you could help me out, please. Thank
Sure.
you
Yep,
for
yeah,
that
Mr. Walker
quick
has
update.
his hand.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Board Member Walker.
Yeah, thank you, thank you, Chair. And this is for Superintendent or Assistant Superintendent Torres-Hill. Um, my question was about the capstone, which you talked to, but I didn't see all the details spelled out.
Okay.
What you were saying is we're moving from it being a separate class, which I think it was, to it being a work product produced out of one of the other courses the young person is in. So I guess my question is, how are we assuring that the capstone doesn't get watered down and kind of evaporate? Because it did have value being a standalone deliverable that a young person had to actually have a capstone project. So I guess my question is, even though it's part of some other class, how does it still have that standalone feeling of a paper, report, or presentation, something that, how do you envision this capstone thing having that same vitality?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. We know that, our courses at the high school, we want them to have a performance-based piece to them, right? And so that we want students to be able to demonstrate their learning in different ways. And we also want our courses to align to our career clusters, right? Which is, right, those CTE focused areas where students can now align their core studies to areas of interest. And so what we see here is this will allow, right, for students now to have a variety of ways of connecting what they're learning to different types of courses. So yes, as a standalone course, you did a lot of the research and you had this sort of end of the year culmination, but now we can tie this project-based approach to multiple courses. So students are now learning in a course of interest, high interest to them, because there's a multiple courses that are tagged. And then it is also aligned to their career interest, right? And so we also wanted to take away this requirement of having this course where now it's like we're looping it into something that is already part of their course trajectory. So that'll also free up some other courses for teachers to teach. So we see this as a win-win for the student side and for also allowing for teachers to have other courses. So I think in terms of the actual like losing the feel, I think there will be some professional learning around that, obviously for folks who will be teaching courses that are tagged. And I think that will continue to build off and make sure that students do not lose the essence of what the capstone experience is.
Mr. Walker has a follow-up.
Oh, I see a hand. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you, Superintendent Torres Hill. So I guess I'll make a recommendation and see how your team can approach it.
Sure.
I think as I'm envisioning my, I guess, childhood in school, this is where I would kind of feel like there's some criteria for this. So there'd be some kind of written criteria. I remember with teachers having kind of a project contract where the teacher and I would agree on, I'm going to do so many things, review something, read something. There's something that I'm going to agree to do. And then there'll be some kind of timeline. There's something where we can come back later and say, here's what they agreed to. Did the student actually deliver on this? And it could be in your area of interest. That makes totally good sense. But that's where I would think is something that has more of that project contract feel where we can look at it and see and understand what was agreed, what actually happened, what was the result. The last piece maybe, and this is something for your team to know more so than me, whether that needs to be some type of person or group to at least like to kind of give guidance to teachers in terms of how it gets graded or like to make sure that there's a certain amount of apples and apples to each student's capstone project. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Because each classroom teacher may not necessarily know what the other classroom teacher is doing and what really constitutes a project. But if there was somebody who was the resident expert at a school-based level, so something like that to give a little guidance to teacher as to the scope of a capstone project. So that's all I would just say is a general recommendation, and I will leave it to your team to come back to us with here's how you guys have all worked it out, and then we can look at it and kick the tires and leave with some confidence.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for letting me have that recommendation.
Yes, I'll bring that back to the team. Thank you.
And I don't see
Thank you,
any.
Mr. Walker.
Oh, sorry.
No, no worries. Scrolling through, see here. Okay, no other hands. Okay, perfect. Seeing no other comment on this policy, we'll move on to the second item on our second reading agenda, which is a sexual abuse prevention and education program.
I'll turn it over to Staff Attorney, Mr. Wilson.
So this is the sexual abuse prevention and educational program. This is one of the CABE, one of the policies that in the CABE audit was a mandatory policy that we need to bring in from the board. It parallels the Connecticut General Statute 17A 101Q. I'll note that this provides definitions, but it also talks a bit about kind of like how we're training staff in the educational program that we're giving to our staff around these topical areas. This is work that has been happening in the district. That statute references a rollout of these kind of mandatory trainings, etc., by 2016. So this is work we have been doing as a school district. It's just memorializing the statute. And I'm happy to answer any additional questions about that.
Let's see. I don't think I see any hands up. Am I missing anyone?
No, I don't see hands up.
Okay, okay, perfect. I guess my only question, I think I brought up a few things during the last meeting, or actually 2 meetings ago when we last reviewed this. I think all of those were addressed, right, on this policy.
I don't think we have anything outstanding, Ruth. I apologize.
Okay, we have the, no, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. And I see Mr. Walker has a question.
Mhm.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Walker.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Real simple. I'm probably repeating what I may have asked last time. I'm believing this program is directed towards staff, and so that's the focus here. Am I reading that right up?
Staff and students. So to kind of two
Okay.
parts, right? The staff piece is kind of like how we're training our staff. So like the DCF mandated reporting would be like a staff training on that. I pulled our vector list. We're training staff on, for instance, identification and prevention of adult sexual misconduct against children training. We have a number of trainings that speak to like the training requirements for the staff. For the student piece, the education will be like in that context of like the wellness educational curriculums, health and safety, those kind of things, which the statute allows for those to be how the students are getting that kind of instruction. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. If I could do a quick follow-up, Chair, I think it's the student part. The first part you mentioned, I get because there's staff already does training around a lot of these DCF trainings and some related trainings around student well-being and harassment and abuse and that kind of thing. So I'm assuming, like you said, this is just memorializing what we are currently doing. But with students, maybe it shouldn't be in the policy, but is there like record keeping, or how do we know, if we're going to say it like this, how do we know that students get this training, or how does that happen, I guess? Or just more a general question, because I know it won't be here, I guess, all those details.
Yeah. I guess the student piece, I wouldn't couch it as training, right? Just kind of like education and resources for the student base. The training is largely they're directed at our staff, growing the staff so they're knowledgeable about these particular areas. But when you pack on like page 2 of the actual statute, of the policy, talks about available resources for children affected by sexual abuse or misconduct. So now we're talking about social work services, those kind of things that unpack, because this is just generally making sure we have what they're calling a program that has that educational component for the staff and growing, and then the resources available for our students.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies it. So, okay, so as I'm reading it, then this is more of making students aware and us making sure that the resources are in place. And we are telling students, here are your rights. If this happens, here's where you go. Here's where you can get support, help. So it's that's the student engagement piece, correct?
Correct. And largely those are, when we talk about, I mean, we're talking about a highly delicate subject matter area we're talking about here, right? So the way this might be disclosed in a school might be to the school social worker. And
Okay.
so, the staff component is growing those staff about, the training component that I spoke to a bit earlier as it pertains to the staff and the resources for the students.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Attorney Wilson, correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of your question as well, Board Member Walker, this is education available to all students. And I know I've received the form home from my children saying, do you want to opt them out? Because the default is they're opted in. So the general education is offered to all students whose parents are allowing them to participate. And then it sounds like if somebody is experiencing some type of issue, then there's a procedure as well to get them more support.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this policy? I don't see any hands up. Okay, wonderful. We'll move on to the third item for second reading, which is a district safe school climate and bullying plan, which also came up through a CABE audit. And this policy now will include bullying prevention and intervention, which is why the next item is going to be the repeal of the bullying prevention and intervention policy. With that said, Attorney Wilson, did you want to add anything to that comment?
Just to add, it's one of the mandatory policies. You'll see and hear some language that will be stuff that we need to implement here as a school district. For instance, having this requires the district to have a coordinator in each building, to have a climate representative, which will likely be the principal of the building, to kind of implement the plan as outlined in this policy. So as we walk into the end of the school year, there's some work that we're going to have to do on our district safety team to make sure that we're working with the schools on implementing some of the things that are contained and laid out in this policy.
Thank you. Any questions on this policy? See if I see any hands. Okay, no hands. I think my question last time, Christina, if you could scroll to the first page, there was a reference to a statutory provision that I think we're going to change. Was that
Yes.
at the very beginning? Is this the one that I apologize, I'm not able to open up the document right now. I think there was a reference to something that I asked about. Okay, maybe it was a different policy. Okay.
Oh,
Yes, there was
I
like,
think
I think,
was it McKinney-Vento, the homeless policy?
no, it wasn't I think it was this policy. There's a reference. I'm tempted
Let me
to
see if I
say,
I can look at the
45.
notes real quick.
If you could. I'm not able to open my actual document here with my connection, unfortunately. Okay. If I see, I'll double check, and if I see it, I'll flag it again, because I wanted to make sure that that reference is addressed before we vote on the final policy. And it was at the beginning, but that's okay.
Oh,
Cool.
it was in the bullying, yes.
It was in the bullying policy,
Bullying
and that's being
policy
repealed altogether. Okay,
removed,
that's
yeah.
the relation. Okay, perfect.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, so then we'll pivot then to the next item, which is the repeal of the bullying prevention and intervention policy, because now all of that is within the district safe school climate and bullying plan. Any question on the repeal of the bullying prevention and intervention policy? Okay, moving wonderfully along. The final item on our second reading list is the school closing consolidation policy. I'll preface it again. Yes.
Sorry. It was really the student experiencing homelessness, but did you want to table that to have time for?
Oh, no, sorry. I skipped it. My
Okay.
apologies. I'm jumping ahead. Yes, so the next policy, second to last, the students experiencing homelessness. The last change was a change from correcting every reference of homeless student to student experiencing homelessness. I also have some additional comments regarding this policy that I can now share with those of us here, see if there are any thoughts as to how to address them. And if we think that's too much, we can push it to the next meeting as well, which I suppose is probably not a great thing. If you could share that on the screen, Christina. The first comment I have is on,
Sorry, let me just get to it.
Yeah. I think there are also questions too for my own education, and I think it's mostly directed at the staff at this point.
Can you see these comments here on the right?
Yes, I've actually, oh yeah, I can. We can skip ahead to the one in letter B. Okay. So this seems very subjective. So I'm curious to know, will we have administrative policies with more guidance? Or is the district planning to create more administrative policies with more guidance as to how this enrollment process will unfold? Just leaving it at the discretion of the superintendent seems quite subjective, given that it's the superintendent, there's 39 schools and 16,000 students and so on.
We have been working on updated guidance on homeless students and our safety team meeting. So the answer to your question is yes, that we could, certainly make sure that we're adding more clarity to some of the things that the team is lifting.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So maybe then instead of going through this one by one, just to give a little bit of background, a friend of mine works a lot in homelessness. And as we were discussing this, which is a public policy, I sort of asked for her thoughts, and she was very kind to look at this carefully and offer some thoughts, which I've shared now with the staff. And maybe Christina, if you could also share that with the board, and we could take one more look if anyone has any additional comments. And I think we'll probably do one more round of revision and then bring it to the whole board for adoption at maybe the June meeting, I think, at this point.
Sounds good.
Not to be annoying, but youth is already plural. In that screenshot there, it said children and youths.
Not according to my cousin Vinny.
Youth is already a plural thing, I think. Not to sound really annoying. That's really all I got.
In the document, I was just oh yes, identify homeless children and youths within this. Okay. So that means
Well, I think there's one reference of it. Interesting. I think so. It looks like some of the statutory provisions that are referenced are with youths with an S. So I wonder if that's perhaps why you have that way. But it does have it both with or without S. So that's something we can look at as well before we do the final.
Yeah, sorry
vote.
for being nitpicky about that.
Oh no, that's all right. Okay, perfect. And then the last policy, apologize for jumping the gun here, is the school closing / consolidation policy. I'll preface that by saying it's not that we're actively looking to consolidate or close any schools. This is just a policy that applies to the school closing and consolidation policy if we choose to do that in the future. We had a policy that also entailed a lot of administrative rules, and this change, it shortens the policy itself so that we'll have a policy that's more concise, and then there'll be additional administrative rules to supplement the policy. We discussed this 2 meetings ago, I think back in February or maybe March. I don't know if there are any additional questions or if anybody else had any thoughts on this policy. Okay, seeing none, perfect. This concludes the second reading agenda. We'll move on to the first reading agenda. And the only item on that is the challenging behavior prevention for restorative practices response policy. And I will turn it over to Attorney Wilson for an update.
So this is another one of the mandatory CABE policies. you'll see the first couple pages there are just informative, and then we actually get to the meat of the document here. The new term of art for bullying is the challenging behavior prevention. So this policy speaks to how we handle this in the school. There's also it works with the climate policy that we were just talking about, that actually has the challenging behavior prevention forms, which would replace like the old bullying forms that the families would fill out if they had a concern of bullying or challenging behavior as it pertains to their students. But this policy just kind of unpacks how we handle that and highlights the restorative practices response and approach.
Thank you, Attorney Wilson. Any questions from any of the board members or anyone else on this policy? Okay, no questions. Wonderful. Moving on to the discussion section of our agenda. The first item is the honorary diploma application for Mr. Fothergill. Christina, do you have an update for us after touching base with the school?
Yes, I did speak to the school today, actually, and long story short, they are open to having some sort of recognition at the graduation this year.
Okay.
Talk about the how later, but they are open to it, yes.
Okay, so that's wonderful. By way of background, I probably should have said that first. Mr. Fothergill graduated, well, did not graduate decades ago, and now is seeking an honorary diploma. He was the only student, I believe, expelled at the time during a walkout for civil rights activism. And it is now up to us whether we want to vote to grant him this honorary diploma. Given that it is May and graduation is taking place in a few weeks, I think we should formally vote on this at the board meeting on the 15th.
Yes.
And we will make a decision then. Any questions on that application? Did everyone get a chance to receive and review it? And if not, Christina, can we send that to the entire board
I just have
ahead
a
of May 15th?
I have a procedural
Go ahead.
question. Again, I'm fine with this, but do we have, I never quite remember if we have to like send things to the whole board, like with a vote, like on committee, like do we have to approve? Do we have to like vote here to send it to the board proper with a favorable recommendation? Because I feel like we should.
Oh,
Yeah, if I could step in, Chair, through the.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, it was decided that these committees for the education of board members, and that the committee is not doing any like formal action, so that we're making a recommendation that they approve it. We don't have to necessarily take a formal vote to do that. That's all. So but we can obviously go back to the main committee. In essence, only the full board is actually obligated to make a final deciding vote. I'll say it that way.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Ms. Board Member Darcel Ledger?
Yes, good evening. Good afternoon, good evening. So I just wanted to say, just what Board Member Walker said. We don't vote at committee meetings. So everything takes place at the actual board meeting. This is for like discussion and things like that, things of that nature.
And that would seem in line with everything we do with the first and second readings. We sort of polish, revise, confer, but don't actually take a vote. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. The final item on our agenda for today is the renaming of Classical Magnet School application. Just by way of update, Miss Evelyn LaFontaine, who is the wife of Dr. Hernan LaFontaine, did meet with some folks over at Classical Magnet, the principal, I believe some members of the SGC, and some students as well. As I understand it, it was a productive conversation, and I think both sides got to understand the other sides better. I I think some of the things that, should we proceed to grant this request as a full board and vote yes, I think before we do that, we should have a clear idea in terms of how operationally this will work. For instance, if the school becomes the Hernan Lafontaine Classical Magnet School, does it affect how the name appears? Because that affects their searches for the school. Does the uniform simply say classical, or does it say the Hernan Lafontaine Classical Magnet School? There's operationally, it sounds like there's some things we should figure out, and I think we should find a team internally and of board members who can have a discussion so we can make a recommendation before we vote yes or no. So that's sort of my thoughts. With that said, I will open it up for questions and comments. All right, first Mr. Mills and then Ms. Hackenhall.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea to sort of dig a little bit deeper. I definitely think I mean, I know last time we talked, we said that we heard some pushback from the school itself and some of the students, but I think if they've already sort of had some internal conversations, it would probably be incredibly helpful for us to sort of have a task force, as it were, to look into that a little bit deeper. So I just want to sort of echo that that's a good idea, and I support that. That's all.
That is the first time I think you've embraced one of my ideas, Board Member
Listen,
Mills.
you know, a broken clock is right twice a day.
Thanks, I suppose. Board Member Hackenhall?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was just wondering how have we made it legally noticed that we're talking about this so that people have the opportunity to come to the board meetings and speak in favor or against? Like, I'm just not sure what that process is, and I just want to make sure that we have, I mean, we've heard all the great things, and I don't dispute those, and I just don't know if there's anything that we don't know, how we get that information, if that makes sense. I'm just not sure how we go about that.
Yeah, our revised policy does call for the board to do some due diligence and engage the public. I think we ought to get a little creative as to how we do that. I personally reached out to the school and I spoke with the principal, and I've told her I personally and the board would be willing to meet with anyone else she thinks we should speak with, just so that we're hearing from the applicants directly, but also from other people in the community who feel like they have a feeling one way or another on this. But I think that's all part of what we ought to figure out, because this is not right. This is not a common request, and it's not something we should take lightly. Does that answer a bit of your questions? I think, yeah.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if we, if there was just like a more formal way, because I think the clock is ticking, right? Like, I think we have 3 months to make our decision now that we have passed
at least 3 months.
At least,
but
okay, understood.
We're not obligated to the 3 months. I know we're trying to be mindful of time and respectful of the request. I think our team at a minimum should include our communications folks in terms of, if this happens, the rebranding for the school, what else who do we reach out to? How do we put the word out there, so to speak, so folks can come and opine on this, whether it's at public comment or emailing us or sending in letters, however they choose. So yes, I think point taken that we need to now dive into our board diligence process.
Thank you.
Board Member Walker, and then Board Member Darristelle Ledger.
Board Member Darristelle Ledger was first, so if you would.
My apologies. My screen is I have to flick through. Go ahead, Board Member Darristelle Ledger.
Thank you so much, and I apologize. There are torrential downpours right now, and I'm in the car. But my question is, I understand that you did reach out to and you connected with the principal at Classical. But is there a way to perhaps send out some type of survey of some sorts, or even have perhaps not a community meeting, but some type of town hall that is, pretty much with the families of classical family possible? Have we explored that?
It's not something that we have done, but if that's something we choose to do as part of that board due diligence process, it can certainly be added. You know, I think we need to be mindful between the superintendent search and other engagements, and just the timeline and summer vacation approaching, how we go about that. But, you know, I'm not opposed to the idea, if that's something that the group feels is warranted.
Well, I'm thinking more of, even if it's just sending out, you know, a survey within the school, if you will, or just you know, to classical itself, and getting feedback from the students, because that wouldn't be too time consuming. Perhaps leave you know, have a survey out, leave it out for maybe a few days, maybe even a week, and, you know, get some feedback, so that they feel, you know, the students feel that they were part of the, you know, they have some type of say, or their voice is being heard.
Okay, thank you. Noted. Will something for us to add to how we approach that process. Thank you.
Chair, if I can
Yes.
comment at this point. So my thoughts were along that same line. I was going to recommend kind of like what they do with some regulations, and they maybe produce some type of draft or the draft proposal idea and put it out kind of for general public comment, and then maybe ask people who are interested in it to maybe to come and speak at upcoming board meeting. But it allow us to maybe move ahead by drafting what our ideas are, what, you know, what the background process was, and then inviting people to either comment as board member Darcel Ledger said, maybe either through survey or to attend an upcoming meeting where this would be a topic they could discuss through public comment or whatnot. Yeah, that's all. I'm just going to talk about creating like a public comment period where people can give feedback before we have to make a final decision.
Are we thinking a survey that, I feel like a yes or no question simply is just not adequate? What else? So what type of open-ended questions would this survey be asking?
Well, well, I will defer back to board member Darcel Ledger to talk about the actual survey. I'm just speaking in the same vein. What I was speaking about was creating a public comment period, in which we could draft, if we're thinking about consideration of this and what potential the consideration would be, we could put that out as a proposed like draft and give people an opportunity, more in the general public, an opportunity to comment on it with the idea they could give us feedback or attend an upcoming meeting. We'd have to structure how people can give us feedback. I have not worked out that detail of how feedback would happen. I would like to get people to feedback or come to the meeting and give some public comment. I think board member
Okay, thank you.
has follow-up feedback.
Go ahead, board member Darcel Ledger.
Thank you so much. Well, first, for clarification purposes, I was not indicating that we should have, or suggesting that we should have a special public comment section or segment for the purpose of this discussion. If individuals are, you know, have a concern, or they want to speak about any concern, any issue, anything that's on the agenda, they show up and they organize and they strategize, and their voices are heard. I was just saying that, you know, perhaps flushing out the, you know, any concerns. And I think that what would perhaps bring the anxiety, if you will, or concerns kind of like to ease, is that, you know, although you know, should we vote to change the name or add the name to classical, it's not going to change the theme of the school. It's not going to, you know, remove any of the pedagogical or the, you know, it's not going to remove the classical, like the work that classical has been doing. But his name will be there because he's part of, you know, part of this project. And the uniforms, they just say class, it's just the word classical. It doesn't, I think if it's, you know, it remains classical, which is what it would be doing, it's just adding its name. That's.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think we've been discussing this at such a high level that when it comes to if this goes into effect, there's also how do we put this into effect? And frankly, a lot of these questions have been brought to me and they're new to me. And I think we should include some of the staff at the school, whether it's the director of communications, I don't know, maybe Attorney Wilson and other folks who would be helping to operationalize this. I think we should be discussing this with them because a lot of those open-ended questions need a clear and definite answer, especially at the school level when they're trying to operate their school and do so efficiently and effectively. I think before we say yay or nay to a renaming, we need to be very thoughtful as to how we do it. Do we call it the Hernan Lafontaine Classical Magnet School, or do we rename the building after him so that it's still the Classical Magnet School at the Hernan Lafontaine site, right, as another idea that I had not considered before. So there seems to be so many other avenues that, despite all of our discussion about this, that maybe we had not previously discussed, so more things to consider. And I do think as we do more public comment and invite the public, maybe people will keep suggesting more creative ways to help both honor the legacy, but also make sure that in honoring the legacy of the person who helped to make the school so great, we're not doing anything that could hinder the performance of the school and the things that make it very attractive. Not to say that just naming it after someone would do any of that. So just things for us to consider. I think I saw Mr. Wilson, your hand went up, Board Member Wilson.
Yeah, it was up, but I guess we could talk about it another time. Clarification, we're not renaming the building, we're renaming the school, correct?
Well, I think that's what's now sort of, how do we do it? Because if you recall, like one thing we said was, well, could we rename, you know, the gym after him or the library or something to that effect? Now, another idea that was brought to my attention is it could be that just like there's Montessori at Batchelder, so it could be that it's still Classical Magnet School, but at the Hernan Lafontaine building or something to that effect. So I think there's just more subject matter expertise I need to hear on this to inform how I would structure it as we choose to do this, because I think that what we don't want to do is simply say, yes, let's rename. And then after this decision, everybody then is left having to deal with implementing that. I think we should be very thoughtful as to how we want that implemented and have some clear visions for that. So that way, if we do choose to go that route, it's easier to implement and we're not leaving, you know, a lot of key decisions to people to make that could be consequential to the school one way or another, or disruptive or cause anxiety. For instance, students legitimately have asked, like, do our uniforms stay as classical? Parents wonder, right? So I think those are legitimate questions that folks have that we need to be able to address before we vote one way or another.
Yeah,
Board
so
Member Baristel? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I would agree. I think we need to have out the how we would get this done if we voted in the affirmative. Because those were where probably most of the public, and by public I mean public of the school, questions are going to come from. I would also agree that adding the name doesn't necessarily have to change. Adding Salon Fontaine's name to the school doesn't necessarily mean that the uniforms need to change or how the school is sort of how it's talked about necessarily has changed. I can use Weaver as an example. No one ever really says Thomas Snell Weaver High School, nor is it, necessarily written everywhere. So I think there's some gray areas that need to be sort of ironed out as to when we have discussions with the community about it, we kind of have some answers for them. And the last part I would just say is, if we're renaming the building, does that now, if that was an option, does that now fall under another policy versus the naming of the school policy that we just finished revising?
No, the policy that we have is for renaming a school or any part thereof. So it encompasses an entire school or a subset of a school.
Right, but the point that you were making before was possibly renaming the building to have classical magnet at, such and such. So then would that now fall under another policy on how we go about approving that, if that was an option? Just a thought, nothing that needs to be necessarily answered right now.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Araceli Ledger?
Thank you so much. So for clarification purposes, with regards to Montessori at Batchelder, the reason it's called Montessori at Batchelder is because it's located at Batchelder School. Prior to being located at Batchelder, it was at Moylan. So it was Montessori at, Moylan, so it's the location. So I think that naming the building, it's we should stick with naming the school, because it's, what if they move to another location, perhaps, then we would have to come back to the board and say, well, we're moving from this particular building. Should we vote to change the name? I think it would get a bit more complicated, because at the end of the day, we're renaming the school.
Yeah, I thank you for that comment. I think this is part of the discussion, right? Do we rename the school, or do we do something other than rename the school? Rename a part of the school, find a way to honor his legacy and contributions in a way that doesn't necessarily mean renaming the school in the way that the request came to us.
Can I just follow up?
Sure.
So I just want to say that the request was very clear, to rename the school, not part of the school, not a gym, not the library, but the actual school. And I think that we should honor, I don't want to say honor that request, but look at, if we're going to do that or not, as opposed to look for other ways to kind of dissect and change, and just simply get the feedback from the community, from perhaps, definitely from the students, from the families, from the people who are in the building, people who go to that building every day, former students, how do they feel? Graduates, alumni, all of that.
Thank you for that comment. And I will add that part of the reason for bringing these new topics up is in part because of some of the feedback we are starting to get from people at the school, whether it's the student body, the SGC, and so on. I think we're finding more common ground. But us having had this and the school was completely unaware of it at first, did come as a surprise. So I think we're trying to find ways to make sure that if we do this, we do it in the most thoughtful way as possible. And I would think that, Dr. LaFontaine himself, who helped to create the school and build this legacy, I'm sure he would want his name honored, but in a way that is aligned with the school's mission and not disruptive in any way. And I think that's really what the discussion entails. I think if it needs tweaking the request so that we can accommodate it substantively, I would think that's still better than just voting no entirely on all of the ways that the request came to us. I'll stop there and turn it over to Mr. Mills.
We should really mark this date down because I'm really agreeing with everything that Ruth just said. So just for that, but I do think it's important to note that like, while I don't disagree with board member Darissa Ledger, I think the main point is to make sure that this person who contributed so much to Hartford and the school system is honored. So even if we do or don't put the name on a building, I think it's just important that they get that recognition. And I think that putting together some sort of task force or committee that takes the time to do that due diligence and make sure that we are, acquiescing to their wishes and to the school's wishes is sort of the best solution going forward, just to make sure that we are in fact honoring that person, but also we are honoring the wishes of the current student body and the current SGC. So I agreed with Chairperson Fortune today.
We have a new reason to celebrate Cinco de Mayo. Any other questions or comments?